The howling winds of Xylos clawed at the fractured hull of Alara's research vessel, each gust sending shivers of both cold and dread through her slender blue form. The magnetic storm that had dragged her ship from its orbital path had been as unexpected as it was violent, leaving her stranded on this frozen wasteland at the edge of explored space. Emergency lights flickered weakly inside what remained of the command module, casting her iridescent skin in pulses of crimson that matched the urgency of her situation. Environmental systems failing. The ship's automated voice announced with eerie calm. Main heating unit, offline. Communication array, non-functional. Auxiliary power, 17% and declining. Alara's six-fingered hands trembled as she attempted yet another bypass of the communication system. The cold was seeping into the ship now, turning her breath into crystalline clouds that hung in the air before dissipating. Her large, almond-shaped eyes, deep violet with bioluminescent flecks of silver, scanned the displays for any sign of hope. There was none. A soft, warbling sound came from beneath the navigation console. Alara reached down and gently lifted Pip, her fuzzling companion, into her arms. The small creature's vibrant orange fur stood on end, creating the illusion of a small sun in her arms. Pip nuzzled against her, instinctively curling into a tight ball and generating the modest heat that was characteristic of its species. "I know, little one," she whispered in the melodic tones of her native Zidonian language. "I've tried everything." After 6 hours of futile repair attempts, the auxiliary power dropped below 10%. The environmental suit Alara wore provided minimal protection against the killing cold of Xylos, but without the ship's systems, its effectiveness would soon be measured in minutes rather than hours. Pip sensed her despair, emitting a mournful trill that made Alara's heart clench painfully in her chest. Outside, beyond the broken viewports, the landscape of Xylos stretched endlessly in all directions, a merciless expanse of ice fields and jagged crystalline formations under a perpetually dark sky. The planet was beautiful in its hostility, like a sculpture crafted from nightmares and dreams in equal measure. Alara knew the end was coming. As a xenobiologist, she understood precisely what would happen as her body temperature dropped. First confusion, then lethargy, a false feeling of warmth, unconsciousness, and finally death. The scientific detachment with which she cataloged these stages did nothing to quell her fear. She slumped against the bulkhead, cradling Pip against her chest. The fuzzling's warmth was fading too. Though evolved to survive in cooler environments than Zidonians, even Pip couldn't withstand the extreme conditions of Xylos for long. "I'm sorry I brought you here," she whispered, gently stroking Pip's fur. "You should be chasing light motes in the gardens at home, not?" Her voice faltered. Pip responded by extending tiny tendrils from its fur that wrapped around her fingers, a gesture of comfort exclusive to the bond between a fuzzling and its companion. The auxiliary power dipped below 5%. The emergency lights dimmed further, leaving most of the cabin in shadow. Alara felt the cold penetrating deeper, reaching for her core. She hugged Pip tighter, her body trembling uncontrollably now. "At least we're together," she murmured, allowing her eyes to close. She felt Pip's answering vibration, a purr-like hum that had often lulled her to sleep during long interstellar journeys. It seemed fitting that it would do so one final time. As consciousness began to slip away, Alara's exceptionally sensitive hearing caught something unexpected, a rhythmic crunching sound on the ice outside. Her eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus. Through the viewport, a dark silhouette moved against the swirling snow, growing larger as it approached. Too weak to feel proper fear, Alara watched with distant curiosity as the figure reached her ship's ruined hull. There was a mechanical, grinding noise, followed by the hiss of emergency seals being manually overridden. Cold air rushed in as the external hatch was forced open, and a massive form encased in bulky environmental armor stepped into the cabin. The last thing Alara saw before darkness claimed her was a pair of eyes peering at her through a polarized visor. Not the multifaceted eyes of any species she recognized, but round, singular orbs that reflected her own fading image back at her. Human eyes. Warmth. That was Alara's first sensation as consciousness returned, seeping into her awareness like the gentle rays of her homeworld's twin suns. She felt it spreading through her limbs, chasing away the memory of numbing cold. For a moment, she wondered if this was the final hallucination before death, the brain's merciful chemical farewell. But then came sounds, a low, rhythmic humming of machinery, the soft crackle of what might be flame, unintelligible noises that had a pattern suggesting language. And beneath it all, a familiar warble that jolted her fully awake. Pip! Alara's eyes snapped open, immediately overwhelmed by unfamiliar surroundings. She was in a cave, its natural stone walls reinforced with metallic panels and what appeared to be insulating material. A portable heating unit glowed orange-red several feet away, radiating blessed warmth. Thermal blankets had been wrapped around her, creating a cocoon of surprising comfort. But most surprisingly, Pip was perched on her chest, vibrating with excitement. The fuzzling's orange fur was fluffed out in all directions, a sure sign of agitation or alertness. When Alara stirred, Pip bounced up and down, trilling excitedly. "Easy, little one," she whispered hoarsely, her throat painfully dry. "Where are?" A movement at the edge of her vision cut her words short. The figure she had glimpsed before losing consciousness was there, still mostly encased in environmental armor, but with the helmet removed, revealing a human face. Male, Alara guessed, based on her limited knowledge of the species. His skin was a deep brown, weathered by what looked like years of exposure to harsh conditions. Dark hair was cropped close to his skull, and a scar ran from his left temple to the corner of his mouth, giving him a perpetually grim expression. He was watching her intently, one hand hovering near what appeared to be a weapon at his hip. Upon seeing her awake, he straightened, saying something in a deep, gruff voice. The words were completely foreign to Alara, the sounds harsh and abrupt compared to the flowing syllables of Zidonian. Pip reacted instantly, spinning to face the human and emitting a threatening growl. The creature's fur bristled, and the tiny bioluminescent spots along its spine began to pulse with warning colors. Though barely the size of Alara's two hands placed together, Pip positioned itself protectively between her and the stranger. The human took a step back, holding up his hands in what Alara recognized as a universal gesture of non-aggression. He spoke again, softer this time, then slowly reached for something on a nearby, improvised table. Alara tensed, but he merely held up a container of what appeared to be water. Moving cautiously, he placed the container on the ground and slid it toward her with his foot, then retreated several paces. The message was clear even without shared language. "Drink if you wish, I'll keep my distance." Alara's throat burned with thirst, but caution made her hesitate. She glanced at Pip, who had stopped growling but maintained its defensive posture. The human seemed to understand her reluctance. He picked up another container, identical to the one he had offered her, and demonstratively drank from it before setting it down again. Still wary, Alara slowly sat up, keeping the thermal blankets wrapped around her. She reached for the water container, noticing as she did that her environmental suit had been partially removed. The outer layers peeled away, leaving only the insulating undersuit. She felt a flash of vulnerability, quickly suppressed by the rational understanding that if the human had wanted to harm her, he could have done so while she was unconscious. The water was cool and clean, bringing immediate relief to her parched throat. Alara drank greedily before remembering Pip. She poured a small amount into her palm, which Pip lapped up eagerly. "Thank you," she said in Zidonian, knowing the human wouldn't understand the words, but hoping the tone would convey her meaning. The human tilted his head slightly, then nodded once. He gestured to himself and spoke a single word, "Kale." Alara understood. She touched her own chest and responded, "Ilara." Then she gently stroked Pip and added, "Pip." The human, Kale, nodded again. "Ilara," he repeated, the pronunciation slightly off but recognizable. "Pip." This seemed to satisfy him for the moment. He turned away, busying himself with what appeared to be equipment salvage spread across a makeshift workbench. Now, with a moment to assess her surroundings more carefully, Alara realized they were in a natural cave that had been converted into a temporary shelter. A generator hummed in one corner, powering the heating unit and several light sources. Various containers were stacked against one wall, supplies, she assumed. Near the cave entrance, partially visible behind a thermal barrier, snow and ice swirled in a violent white blur. The storm had intensified. Pip hopped off her chest and began cautiously exploring the immediate area, keeping a wary distance from Kale. The fuzzling's natural curiosity seemed to be overcoming its initial fear, which Alara took as a positive sign. Fuzzlings had an almost preternatural sense for detecting threats, and Pip's willingness to investigate suggested the human posed no immediate danger. Attempting to stand proved more difficult than Alara anticipated. Her legs buckled beneath her, still weak from the hypothermia she had nearly succumbed to. The noise of her stumbling drew Kale's attention. He turned quickly, then approached with slow, deliberate movements when he saw her struggling. He stopped a respectful distance away and extended a hand, his intent clear, an offer of assistance. Alara hesitated, then accepted, allowing him to help her to a sitting position on what appeared to be a crate repurposed as seating. The physical contact, brief as it was, sent an unexpected tremor through her. His skin was much warmer than hers. Humans ran hotter than Zidonians, apparently. Kale returned to his workbench, but now positioned himself so he could keep her in his peripheral vision. He picked up a small device and began tinkering with it, occasionally glancing at Alara as if checking that she remained stable. Communication was the obvious challenge. Alara, like most Zidonians, possessed limited telepathic abilities, useful for bonding with creatures like Pip, but insufficient for meaningful contact with a completely alien mind like Kale's. Without technology to bridge the gap, they would have to rely on more primitive methods. Alara watched as Pip cautiously approached Kale's boots, sniffing curiously. To his credit, the human remained perfectly still, allowing the fuzzling to investigate. When Pip eventually placed a tiny paw on his foot, Kale smiled, the first expression beyond wariness Alara had seen from him. The simple gesture transformed his face, softening the hardness that seemed etched into his features. Perhaps, Alara thought, they might find a way to understand each other after all. The storm intensified over the next 2 days, imprisoning them together in the cave. Though initially fraught with mutual suspicion, their enforced proximity gradually established a fragile routine. Kale maintained the heating unit and prepared food from his supplies, carefully testing each offering with a handheld scanner before sharing it with Alara to ensure compatibility with her biology. She, in turn, used her knowledge of Pip's physiology to help the fuzzling adjust to the cave environment, ensuring it remained healthy despite the harsh conditions. Communication evolved through necessity. They began with gestures and simple drawings etched into the stone floor or displayed on damaged datapads. Kale proved surprisingly patient, repeating words in his language while Alara did the same in hers. Though neither could construct meaningful sentences in the other's tongue, they assembled a small vocabulary of essential terms: water, food, danger, pain, sleep, cold, warm. On the 3rd day, as Alara watched Kale attempting to repair what appeared to be a signal amplifier, she noticed his movements becoming increasingly frustrated. He muttered words she didn't understand, though their meaning was clear enough from his tone. Finally, he slammed a tool down and paced the limited confines of the cave. "Problem?" she asked, using one of the human words she'd learned. Kale looked at her, surprise briefly replacing his frustration. It was the first time she had initiated conversation in his language. He nodded, pointing to the device and then making a gesture that mimicked braking. Alara approached cautiously, examining the amplifier. Though the technology was unfamiliar, the basic principles of signal processing were universal. She gestured to ask if she could try, and after a moment's hesitation, Kale stepped aside. Working carefully, Alara identified what appeared to be a damaged connector. She glanced around the cave, spotted Pip investigating a pile of discarded equipment and called the fuzzling over with a soft whistle. The creature bounded to her side instantly. Alara gently stroked Pip in a specific pattern, a signal they had developed over years together. Understanding the request, Pip's fur parted to reveal one of several small tools Alara had specially designed for the fuzzling to carry. Kale watched in evident fascination as Alara extracted the tiny instrument, a precision manipulator no larger than her smallest finger, and began working on the damaged connector. After several minutes of delicate adjustments, something clicked into place and the device emitted a low hum. "Fixed," she said, using another human word she had learned. Kale's expression shifted from surprise to something approaching respect. He nodded slowly, then pointed to the entrance of the cave where the storm still raged. He made a sweeping gesture followed by tapping his wrist device several times, which Alara interpreted as indicating the storm's duration. "Long," he said, one of the Zidonian words he had picked up. "Very long." Alara nodded her understanding. They were trapped, possibly for many more days. Their survival would depend on both of them contributing their skills and knowledge. As if to emphasize the precariousness of their situation, the heating unit suddenly sputtered, its orange glow dimming momentarily before stabilizing at a lower intensity. Kale frowned, moving quickly to examine it. His expression told Alara everything she needed to know. Another problem, potentially more serious than the amplifier. That night, as Kale slept on the opposite side of the cave, Alara found herself watching him. The human slept fitfully, occasionally muttering words she couldn't understand, his brow furrowed even in unconsciousness. Pip was curled against her side, generating a comforting warmth, but Alara noticed the fuzzling's fur wasn't as vibrant as usual, a sign of stress or possible nutritional deficiency. Their circumstances were deteriorating, and Alara knew that without intervention, the outcome would eventually be the same as if Kale had never found them: a cold, lonely death on this frozen world. The thought sent a tremor through her slender frame. As if sensing her distress, Pip stirred, looking up at her with tiny eyes that gleamed in the dim light. The fuzzling made a questioning trill. "It's all right," Alara whispered in Zidonian, stroking Pip gently. "We're going to find a way home." The promise felt hollow, even as she spoke it, but something in her refused to surrender to despair. She had survived the crash. Kale had rescued them from certain death. Against all probability, a human and a Zidonian were coexisting in this frozen hell. Perhaps other impossibilities awaited. With that thought holding back the darkness, Alara finally drifted into uneasy sleep. Morning brought no relief from the storm, but it did bring a new crisis. The heating unit failed completely, plunging the cave's temperature into a rapid decline. Kale worked frantically to restore it, his breath clouding in the increasingly frigid air, while Alara huddled with Pip, trying to preserve whatever warmth they could. After an hour of unsuccessful attempts, Kale's frustration was palpable. He slammed his hand against the cave wall, then turned to Alara, his expression grim. He pointed to the heating unit, then drew his finger across his throat in a universal gesture of finality. "Dead," he said, using a Zidonian word he had learned. Alara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Without heat, the cave would soon be as deadly as the open terrain outside. She looked at Pip, who was already shivering despite its natural ability to generate warmth. Kale seemed to reach a decision. He moved to a container near his sleeping area and extracted what appeared to be additional environmental gear, heavier, more insulated than what he currently wore. He began donning it piece by piece, his movements efficient and practiced. Alara watched, a dawning realization making her stomach clench. "Go," she asked in his language, pointing toward the cave entrance. Kale nodded. He pointed to himself, then outside, then made a gesture indicating return. He held up 5 fingers twice. 10, Alara said, understanding. 10 hours. A dangerous expedition, especially in the storm, but they had few options. She stood, indicating that she would accompany him, but Kale firmly shook his head. He pointed to her, then to Pip, then made a staying gesture. Next, he pointed to his own chest, then outside again, and finally to what looked like parts from his own vessel, stored in a corner of the cave. His meaning was clear. He would go alone to retrieve components from his ship that might repair the heating unit. Alara wanted to protest, but knew the logic was sound. Her physiology was less adapted to extreme cold than his, and venturing into the storm would likely kill her before she could be of any help. Still, the thought of Kale facing the deadly conditions alone troubled her more than she expected. He finished suiting up, securing his helmet with a pressurized click. The polarized visor obscured his face, rendering him suddenly alien again, a faceless figure like the one who had appeared at her crash site. Before heading to the exit, he paused and returned to his supplies, extracting emergency thermal blankets which he brought to Alara. "Survive," he said in crude Zidonian, pressing the blankets into her hands. "Wait." Then he activated the hatch shield just long enough to slip through, disappearing into the white maelstrom beyond. Alara wrapped herself and Pip in the thermal blankets, creating a small pocket where they could share body heat. The cave grew colder with each passing minute. To conserve energy, she initiated a meditative state that Zidonians used during long space journeys, a condition of reduced metabolism that required minimal oxygen and generated little waste heat. Time became fluid, awareness dimming to a pinpoint, focused only on Pip's presence against her. The fuzzling remained alert, occasionally trilling to ensure Alara maintained some level of consciousness. As hours passed, even with the blankets and meditative state, the cold seeped deeper, numbing Alara's extremities and making coherent thought increasingly difficult. 8 hours. 9. Her chronological sense, usually precise, began to falter. Had Kale said 10 hours or 12? Would he return at all? Or had the storm claimed him? Had he even intended to come back? Or was this abandonment a convenient solution to the burden of keeping an alien alive? The doubt shamed her almost immediately. Kale had shown nothing but concern for their welfare, despite having no obligation toward them. If he failed to return, it would be because he couldn't, not because he wouldn't. Just as this thought crystallized, Pip suddenly stiffened, its fur bristling. The fuzzling's head turned toward the cave entrance, ears rotating forward in the posture Alara recognized as alert anticipation. Moments later, the hatch shield activated and a snow-covered figure stumbled through. Kale was nearly unrecognizable, his environmental suit encrusted with ice and partially torn in places. He lurched forward, dropped the container he'd been carrying, then collapsed to his knees. His hands, shaking violently, fumbled with his helmet releases. When he finally removed it, Alara saw blood frozen on his face from a gash across his forehead. Despite her weakened state, she untangled herself from the blankets and crawled to him. Up close, she could see that frostbite had begun to affect his exposed skin where the suit had been compromised. Kale's eyes were unfocused, his breathing labored. Classic symptoms of hypothermia, dangerously advanced from what Alara could determine. "Parts," he managed to say, gesturing weakly to the container. "Fix. Heat." Alara understood what needed to be done. While Kale had risked himself to retrieve the components, he was now too injured and cold-affected to implement the repairs. That responsibility fell to her. She helped him move closer to where the blankets were, positioning him so he could retain whatever body heat remained. Pip, sensing the gravity of the situation, pressed against Kale's side without prompting, channeling its modest heat generation toward the human. Working quickly despite numbed fingers, Alara opened the container to find a collection of power cells and mechanical components. Her knowledge of human technology was limited, but the heating unit's design was relatively straightforward. She began disassembling the damaged sections, replacing power couplings and bypassing a shorted thermal regulator. Time stretched painfully as she worked. Every few minutes, she checked on Kale, whose condition was deteriorating. His shivering had stopped. Not a good sign, as Alara knew this indicated his body was no longer fighting to generate heat. Pip remained vigilant, trilling with increasing urgency each time Alara looked over. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely less than one, Alara connected the last component. She activated the unit, holding her breath as it hummed to life. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then, gradually, blessed warmth began to radiate outward. She dragged herself back to Kale, whose skin had taken on a grayish pallor. His breathing was shallow, his pulse weak when she pressed her fingers to his neck. Moving on instinct, Elara retrieved her environmental suit, damaged though it was, and added it as another layer over the thermal blankets surrounding him. "Kale," she said, her voice cracking from cold and disuse. "Kale." His eyes fluttered but didn't open. Elara felt panic rising. She had limited knowledge of human physiology, but knew that his current state was life-threatening. What would a human medic do in this situation? Warmth. The answer came suddenly. He needed warmth delivered more efficiently than the ambient heating could provide. Without further hesitation, Elara slipped beneath the blankets and pressed herself against Kale's side, opposite from Pip. She positioned her body to maximize contact, despite their physical differences. Zidonians ran cooler than humans naturally, but her body was still a source of heat. As they lay there, the heating unit gradually brought the cave's temperature back from lethal levels. Elara focused on monitoring Kale's vital signs, relieved when his breathing deepened and his pulse strengthened. After what seemed an eternity, his eyes opened, clouded with confusion that slowly cleared as awareness returned. He turned his head, finding himself face-to-face with Elara, close enough that she could see the flecks of amber in his brown eyes. For a moment, neither moved, locked in a gaze of mutual recognition. Recognition not just of each other as individuals, but of the profound truth that had brought them to this moment. They had each risked everything to save the other, without expectation of return. "Thank you," Kale said in halting Zidonian. Elara smiled, a gesture she had observed humans use to express positive emotions. "Thank you," she replied in his language. The cave continued to warm around them, and for the first time since her crash, Elara felt something. Beyond mere survival stirring within her. Hope, perhaps, or something even more unexpected. The days that followed brought an evolution in their relationship that neither could have anticipated. As they recovered from their respective brushes with death, the tentative trust between them deepened into something approaching friendship. Their improvised language expanded, combining words from both their species with gestures and drawings to create a unique form of communication that, while limited, allowed for increasingly complex exchanges. Kale proved to be resourceful beyond Elara's initial assessment. He fashioned tools from salvaged materials, reinforced weak points in the cave structure, and efficiently rationed their limited supplies. Elara contributed her scientific knowledge, identifying a species of luminescent lichen growing in the deeper recesses of the cave that, when properly processed, provided a nutritional supplement compatible with both their physiologies. Pip became their unlikely intermediary, the fuzzling's natural empathic abilities allowing it to sense emotional states that bypassed language barriers. When miscommunications arose, and they did, sometimes resulting in tense moments of frustration, Pip would intervene with playful antics or soothing trills that defused the situation. Through careful observation and tentative questions, Elara learned that Kale was not, as she had first assumed, a military figure. He was what humans called a scavenger or salvager, operating independently to recover valuable materials from abandoned sites or dangerous locations. His presence on Xylos was motivated by rumors of rare minerals in the planet's crust, though he admitted through their crude communication that the potential profit had not justified the risk. In turn, Elara explained her research mission, how she had been charting biodiversity patterns at the boundaries of explored space, searching for evolutionary parallels between distant ecosystems. Kale seemed genuinely interested, particularly in her relationship with Pip, which he initially mistook for simple pet ownership before coming to understand the deeper symbiotic connection between Zidonian and Fuzzling. One evening, as they shared a meal of processed rations supplemented with the cave lichen, a distant rumbling vibrated through the stone around them. Kale tensed immediately, his hand moving to the weapon at his hip. When the rumbling intensified, He gestured for Alara to move away from the wall nearest the sound. Cave. Not stable, he said, combining words from both languages. No sooner had he spoken than a section of the ceiling cracked, sending stone fragments raining down. As the larger collapse began, Kale lunged forward, pushing Alara clear of the falling debris. She tumbled to safety, clutching Pip who had leapt in her arms, but when she turned back, she saw Kale on one knee, grimacing in pain. A jagged rock had struck his arm, tearing through his undersuit and leaving a deep gash that immediately began bleeding profusely. Alara scrambled to his side as he pressed his other hand over the wound, trying to stem the flow of blood. Without hesitation, she reached into a small compartment on her utility belt, one of the few items she had salvaged from her ship, and withdrew a sealed packet containing a Zidonian medicinal compound. It was a bioactive gel used for emergency treatment, capable of sealing wounds and accelerating cellular regeneration. She gestured for Kale to remove his hand from the wound. When he hesitated, she pointed to the packet and pantomimed healing. After a moment, he complied, revealing a laceration that would certainly require stitches under normal circumstances. Alara applied the gel carefully, watching as it adhered to the wound edges and began emitting a soft blue luminescence, the sign that it was interacting properly with living tissue. Though designed for Zidonian physiology, the basic principles of wound closure were universal enough that she felt confident it would help rather than harm. Kale watched with a mixture of pain and fascination as the bleeding slowed, then stopped altogether. The gel hardened slightly, forming a flexible seal over the wound. He flexed his arm experimentally, wincing but seeming impressed by the maintained mobility. Alara, medicine good, he said, the simple phrase carrying genuine gratitude. She nodded, then surprised herself by reaching out to touch his uninjured arm lightly. A gesture of reassurance she would have offered a fellow Zidonian without thought, but which felt suddenly significant across species. Kale looked at her hand, then up at her face, an unreadable expression crossing his features before settling into a tentative smile. Pip, who had been anxiously watching the proceedings from Alara's shoulder, chose that moment to hop down and sniff at Kale's sealed wound. After a thorough investigation, the fuzzling did something it had never done before. It climbed onto Kale's lap and curled into a ball, purring contentedly. The gesture wasn't lost on either of them. Fuzzlings were notoriously selective about physical contact, generally limiting it to their bonded Zidonian companions. For Pip to voluntarily approach Kale this way represented a profound statement of acceptance. Kale, seeming to understand the significance, remained perfectly still for a long moment before cautiously raising his uninjured hand to stroke Pip's fur. The fuzzling's purr intensified, tiny paws kneading against Kale's leg in evident pleasure. Family now, Alara said, using a human word she had learned just days before, when Kale had shown her images of his own relatives stored in a personal device. Kale's eyes widened slightly, then softened with an emotion Alara couldn't quite name, but felt resonating within herself. Yes, he replied simply. Family. The storm outside finally began to subside on their 12th day together. Kale ventured to the cave entrance, returning with news delivered through their hybrid language. The worst had passed, though the planet's natural conditions remained hostile. Leave soon, he said, gesturing outward. Before next storm, Alara nodded, understanding the urgency. Xylos had brief periods of relative calm between its ferocious weather systems, and if they hoped to escape, they would need to act during this window. But how? Her ship was damaged beyond repair, and while Kale's vessel was apparently intact, he had indicated through their discussions that it lacked the capability for interstellar travel. It was a short-range craft designed for planetary operations. Sensing her concern, Kale retrieved a device from his equipment pile, the signal amplifier they had repaired together. He activated it, producing a holographic display that Alara recognized as a communications diagram. He pointed to the amplifier, then to a larger component salvaged from her crashed ship, making connection gestures between them. Signal. Space, he said. Help come. It was an elegant solution, combining their resources. Kale's equipment had the power source and basic transmission capability, while her ship's communication array, though damaged, contained the necessary deep space broadcast protocols that might reach passing vessels or distant stations. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Kale ventured out briefly to retrieve additional components from both vessels, returning each time with frost crusting his environmental suit but bearing crucial elements for their makeshift beacon. Alara worked on programming the signal, adapting universal distress protocols to function with the hybrid technology. Pip contributed in its own way, serving as an early warning system when the cave temperature fluctuated and keeping their spirits up with playful antics during moments of frustration. The fuzzling had grown visibly attached to Kale, often dividing its time equally between him and Alara, a development that continued to surprise and somewhat delight her. On the 15th day, they were ready. The combined transmitters stood in the center of the cave, a jury-rigged assemblage of mismatched technology that nonetheless represented their best hope for rescue. Kale made a final adjustment to the power coupling, then looked to Alara, nodding once. She activated the sequence. For a terrible moment, nothing happened. Then the device hummed to life, indicators flickering as the signal began propagating outward, reaching for the stars hidden beyond Xylos's perpetually clouded sky. "Now we wait," Kale said, the phrase one of the more complex ones they had established in their shared vocabulary. Wait they did. Hours stretched into days as the beacon continued its silent plea. They maintained their routine, though both felt the shift in dynamics. A tension born not of conflict, but of uncertain futures. What would happen when rescue came? Would they go their separate ways, returning to lives that had no place for the other? The questions remained unspoken, but hung in the air between them. On the 4th day after activating the beacon, Pip suddenly perked up, its fur standing on end in the pattern Alara recognized as sensing electromagnetic activity. Moments later, Kale's equipment pinged with an incoming transmission. They both rushed to the receiver. Static crackled through the speaker before resolving into a voice, neither human nor Zidonian, but speaking in the standardized trade language used by the Interstellar Commerce Guild. Unidentified transmission source. This is Guild Vessel Horizon's promise responding to distress signal. Please confirm nature of emergency and life forms present. Kale looked to Alara, a complex mix of emotions crossing his face. Relief, certainly, but also something that looked remarkably like regret. He activated the response channel and spoke in the trade language, which Alara understood only partially from her limited diplomatic training. He identified their location, specified that they were a human and a Zidonian with a fuzzling companion, and requested immediate evacuation. The guild representative responded that they would arrive within 12 hours, their ship already being relatively close to the Xylos system on a routine patrol. 12 hours. Half a day remained of their strange exile together. They spent the time gathering what few possessions they wished to take. Alara's research data, Kale's salvage finds, the few tools they had created together. Neither spoke much, the impending separation casting a shadow over activities that had become comfortably familiar. As they finished preparations, Kale suddenly paused, turning to Alara with an intensity in his expression that made her breath catch. He fumbled with words, switching between languages as he tried to articulate something complex. "When ship comes," he finally managed, "I go with you, or you with me, or we separate." The question laid bare the choice that had been forming in Alara's mind. Protocol would dictate that she return to Zidonian space, report her findings, and resume her research under proper supervision. Logic suggested Kale would return to human territories, where his salvage could be converted to whatever currency humans valued. But protocol and logic seemed hollow measured against the bond forged in this frozen cave. They had saved each other's lives, learned to communicate across vast biological and cultural divides, created something unique between them that defied conventional categorization. Before she could respond, Pip made the decision for them. The fuzzling hopped from Alara's shoulder to Kale's, then back again, trilling insistently. Its meaning couldn't have been clearer if it had spoken. "We stay together." Alara smiled, the expression now coming naturally to her. "We go together," she said in human language. Then, switching to Zidonian, which Kale now partially understood, she added, "Family stays together." Kale's face transformed with relief, and something deeper, something that mirrored the warmth spreading through Alara's chest. He reached out slowly, offering his hand palm up, a gesture they had developed to signal agreement. Alara placed her six-fingered hand in his five-fingered one, the physical differences highlighting the distance they had crossed to find common ground. Pip trilled happily from its perch on her shoulder, its fur glowing with contentment. Outside, Xylos continued its endless winter. But within the cave that had been their sanctuary and crucible, a different season had taken root, one of possibility and connection that neither had imagined when they first laid eyes on each other. When the guild vessel arrived hours later, its landing lights cutting through the perpetual gloom of Xylos like the first dawn breaking, Alara and Kale emerged from the cave together. Between them, Pip bounced excitedly, leading the way toward whatever awaited them among the stars. They carried more than just salvage and research data. They carried the knowledge that life, with all its capacity for resilience and adaptation, could flourish in the most unexpected places. That understanding transcended language, species, and the cold distances between worlds, a truth as boundless as the universe itself. The guild representative who greeted them, a meridian with iridescent scales and 4 arms, seemed momentarily taken aback by the sight of a human and Zidonian emerging together from the frozen landscape. But professional training quickly reasserted itself, and they were efficiently processed aboard the vessel with minimal questions. As the ship lifted off, leaving Xylos behind, Alara stood at a viewport with Kale beside her and Pip nestled contentedly between them. The planet that had nearly claimed their lives diminished below, becoming just another glittering point in an endless cosmos filled with possibilities. "Where now?" Kale asked softly, the question encompassing worlds of meaning beyond its simple words. Alara considered for a moment, then gestured toward the stars spreading before them. "Everywhere," she replied. "Together." And in that moment, as warmth and light surrounded them, the memory of Cole became just that, a memory transformed by what had blossomed in its midst.